Sjedinjene Američke Države sebe nazivaju vodećom svjetskom demokratijom. Ta konstatacija po njima znači da su oni ostvarili najveći stupanj poštovanja ljudskih prava i sloboda u društvu podjednakih šansi za sve ljude bez obzira na razlike među njima. Amerika se ponosi ovim svojim dostignućem i postavila ga je kao model i cilj svim ostalim narodima na svijetu. Oni koji ne prihvate ove njihove vrijednosti i koji se usude da iskažu svoje neslaganje, bivaju optuženi, izolovani, izloženi ekonomskim i drugim blokadama, a često i vojno napadnuti. Da bi sve nabrojane akcije prikazali legitimnim i opravdanim, oni se za potrebne rezolucije obraćaju institucijama koje su sami osnovali i koje kontrolišu, poput Ujedinjenih nacija i Savjeta bezbjednosti, NATO-a i sl. Ovakvo je činjenično stanje. Međutim, neizbježno se nameću dva pitanja. Prvo, da li je Amerika zaista idealno društvo i zaštitnih ljudskih prava kakvim se predstavlja? Odgovor je jednostavan i lak. Takva tvrdnja je velika laž, a realnost je sušta suprotnost. Sve statistike pokazuju da je Amerika najveće svjetsko leglo kriminala, imaju ubjedljivo najveću stopu ubistava i samoubistava, narkomanije, silovanja, nasilja u porodici, razvoda i na prvom su mjestu u svijetu po broju zatvorske populacije. Drugo, da li Sjedinjene Američke Države imaju moralno pravo da drugima nameću svoje vrijednosti i kako su se oni po tom pitanju pokazali u prošlosti i kako se pokazuju i dan danas? Historijski gledano, zemlje Zapada, na čelu sa Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama, su apsolutni šampioni kada se radi o sistematskom i kolektivnom ubijanju ljudi. Oni u ovome jednostavno nemaju konkurenciju. Tokom naseljavanja kontinenta koji će se kasnije nazvati Amerika, gotovo je u potpunosti istrijebljen autohtoni indijanski narod. U današnjoj međunarodnoj terminologiji ovo se naziva genocid najvećih razmjera. Mali broj preživjelih indijanaca zatvoren je u rezervate poput životinja.
The United States settlers who wanted our land paid bounty hunters $100 for the scalp of an Apache warrior and $50 for an Apache woman.
There was a slave trade going through this whole area. The Navajos had lost tremendous numbers. In fact, my mother's father was either the son of a slave or else a slave himself. They needed the cheap labor just like they needed the black labor from Africa, and here it was Indian people because we were still subhuman to them, just another beast of burden. This land to Apaches is a living entity and it's sacred, but to white people it means minerals, it means gold, it means silver, and the Indian indigenous rights didn't mean anything to them.
It was just an almost hunger for land. The pioneers moving westward, saying it was their manifest destiny to do this. It was their God-given right to do this, and whoever was living there, it's okay because it's my destiny to take that land over and let's wipe them off the face of the earth.
There is to be no council held with the Indians, nor any talks. The men are to be slain whenever they can be found. The women and children may be taken as prisoners. General James Carleton. Orders to the officers of the California Battalion.
We lost maybe 80% of our numbers because of war, because of disease. It was a government policy, this genocide policy was in effect to get rid of our tribe. Not to rehabilitate us or not to do anything except just to put us in areas where tuberculosis and malaria and other diseases would eventually eliminate our tribe.
Ova zastrašujuća i sramna stranica američke istorije poslužila je kao model ideolozima cionizma koji su nakon Drugog svjetskog rata na sličan način, krvlju i ubijanjem, jednostavno oteli Palestinu od njenih pravih vlasnika. Naravno, ta ista Amerika je bila i do danas ostala njihov najveći podržavalac i saveznik. Kolonijalizam, ili drugim riječima nasilno okupiranje nerazvijenih zemalja radi krađe njihovih prirodnih resursa i porobljavanja ljudi, odnijelo je više od 50 miliona ljudskih života. U svjetskim ratovima, koji su zapadnjaci započeli i vodili, ubijeno je više od 70 miliona ljudi. Kraj Drugog svjetskog rata se jasno nazirao. Njemačka i Italija su već kapitulirale, Japan je bio na izmaku snaga i blizu predaje. Neki američki zvaničnici su nagovarali predsjednika Trumana da baci atomsku bombu na neko nenaseljeno područje, kako bi pokazali Japancima koliko je smrtonosno to novo oružje, što bi doprinijelo njihovoj ubrzanoj predaji. Međutim, atomska bomba je bačena na Hirošimu, grad koji je brojao 255.000 stanovnika, bez ikakvog prethodnog upozorenja. U jednom trenutku je poginulo 140.000 ljudi. Temperatura na tlu u blizini središta eksplozije dosezala je i do 5.000 stepeni Celzijusovih. Snažni udarni talas, brzine 800 km na čas i plamene oluje uništili su gotovo sve unutar 13 kvadratnih kilometara. Eksplozija je uzrokovala i vreli gljivasti oblak prašine i krhotina visok preko 15.000 metara. Prema procjenama, 250.000 stanovnika Hirošime umrlo je odmah nakon eksplozije ili u roku od 5 godina od bolesti uzrokovanih radijacijom. Mnogi od preživjelih su kasnije umirali od posljedica bombardovanja, kao što su rak i leukemija, tako da niko sa sigurnošću ne zna koliki je krajnji bilans žrtava. Druga atomska bomba je bačena na grad Nagasaki.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
U trenu je uništeno pola grada. Procjenjuje se da je od eksplozije i udarnog talasa poginulo najmanje 78.000 ljudi. Crne kišne kapi koje su kasnije padale i nosile radijaciju odnijele su još mnogo života. Stručnjaci tvrde da nije bilo nikakvih vojno-strategijskih razloga za upotrebu atomskih bombi. Prethodna velika bombardovanja i razaranja japanskih gradova su već bila uništila njihovu vojnu industriju i prehrambenu proizvodnju do te mjere da su bili u kritičnom stanju. Na to se mora dodati i sovjetsko proglašenje rata Japanu. Pitanje nije bilo da li su Japanci spremni za nastavak ratovanja, već je bilo pitanje dana kada će oni proglasiti bezuslovnu kapitulaciju, jer svakako nisu više bili u stanju ratovati zbog nedostatka oružja i prehrane. Vijetnam. Okrutni 12-godišnji rat u kojem je ubijeno više od 600.000 Vijetnamaca. Sjedinjene Američke Države do današnjeg dana nisu dale prihvatljivo i logično objašnjenje šta su oni u stvari tražili u jednoj dalekoj, nezavisnoj državi koja nikada i ni na koji način nije ugrozila bilo koji američki interes. Ništa osim ispraznih riječi koje su postale uzrečica gotovo svim američkim predsjednicima.
Americans have gone to far lands to fight for freedom. We have learned that weakness does not bring peace.
Poznato je da je tokom rata američka vojska Vijetnam koristila i kao poligon za isprobavanje najnovijih vrsta oružja, uključujući razne vrste bojnih otrova i hemikalija, od kojih je najpoznatiji Agent Orange, hemikalija koja je posipana po vijetnamskim džunglama, a izazivala je otpadanje lišća sa drveća, a kod ljudi koji su došli u kontakt sa njom, rak i druga teška oboljenja.
The chemical destruction of Vietnam began as early as 1961 during the Kennedy administration. Over a period of 9 years, the United States sprayed defoliant, principally Agent Orange, over millions of acres of forests and rice fields. McNamara conceived of Vietnam both as a laboratory and a factory. A laboratory in which to test any new or hideous weapon that the Pentagon scientists cared to invent. A factory that accepted the living flesh of the enemy as a raw material to be processed into the commodity of victory. The American commanders in the field followed McNamara's directives. It was the human experience of pain, suffering, mutilation, and death.
I dropped CBUs, which can't destroy anything. It's meant for people. It's an anti-personnel weapon. We used to drop canister upon canister of these things with 200 tumbling little balls in there about this big around with something like 600 pellets in each ball that would blow out as soon as they hit the ground and shred people to pieces. They couldn't be gotten out in many cases. The people would suffer. They would live, but they would suffer, you know, and then often they would die afterwards. And this would cause people to have to take care of them, you know. But I look at my children now, and I don't know what would happen if what I would think about if someone napalmed.
Također, u Vijetnamu su američki vojnici izvršili neke od najstrašnijih zločina nad civilima i zarobljenicima, a neki od tih zločina su zabilježeni okom kamere.
And the war resolved itself into a sequence of brutal images. A straw village set aflame by a soldier's cigarette lighter. A Viet Cong prisoner summarily executed by a pistol shot to the head. A little girl burned by napalm bombs on a road 30 miles north of Saigon. The images forced the American people to bear witness to the killing done in their name.
Zvanični podaci govore da su Amerikanci tokom rata na Vijetnam bacili 6,5 miliona tona bombi. Ovo je čuveni snimak koji pokazuje američke vojnike koji polivaju vodom djecu na koju su prethodno sručili tonu napalm bombi. Slika koja vjerno odslikava američku politiku i takozvanu demokratiju koja se ogleda u bombardovanju i ubijanju nedužne djece i civila da bi zatim istima dijelili pakete humanitarne pomoći. Danas Amerika i Zapad sprovode novu vrstu kolonijalizma, još opasniju i još pogubniju za druge zemlje i narode, iz razloga što su novi pokolji, porobljavanja i pljačke, maskirani imenom demokratija, kojim su masama ljudi isprani mozgovi, tako da oni ne znaju šta demokratija u stvari znači, niti koji su ciljevi onih koji žele da je nametnu cijelom svijetu. Svoj glavni i krajnji cilj, koji namjeravaju ostvariti instaliranjem demokratije na svim meridijanima, zapadni moćnici su definisali riječju globalizacija ili novi svjetski poredak. Ovaj termin znači jedna svjetska vlada koja će apsolutno kontrolisati svo bogatstvo koje posjeduje planeta Zemlja.
A new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle.
President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
New world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
Since Bush, the elder, made his speech at the United Nations back in September of 1990 talking about the New World Order, I think I've become confused about what's actually going on in the world. The New World Order is a more palatable name for the Anglo-American world empire. It's the planetary domination of London, New York, Washington over the rest of the world. It's hard to get people to join that or think they have a part in it if you call it the Anglo-American world empire. If you call it the New World Order, then people in India or someplace like that or the European Union might think, well, there's something in that for us too. But that's not what it is. It's the Anglo-American New World Order. It's really the old world order. It's the British Empire morphing into the American Empire. The US-British world empire is what you're going to get.
Ovaj projekat je već u poodmakloj fazi. Iako se kod ljudi u mnogo većoj mjeri ne probudi kolektivna svijest o onome šta se zaista dešava, posljedice, koje su već sada katastrofalne, mogu postati nesagledive. Onaj koji sumnja u ove tvrdnje i smatra ih pretjerivanjem, mora proučiti istoriju ovih nemilosrdnih ubica i izrabljivača i zatim iz nje izvući pouke. Običan čovjek se mora zapitati kako to da Sjedinjene Američke Države imaju svoje vojne baze u gotovo svakom dijelu svijeta i čemu one služe. Koji je motiv Amerike, koja je prepoznata po nazivu svjetski policajac, da učestvuje u gotovo svakom konfliktu koji se dešava na zemaljskoj kugli, daleko izvan njenih granica? Naravno da se iza svakog od tih konflikata kriju američki interesi koje oni nastoje ostvariti ne birajući sredstva. Uzmimo kao primjer posljednja dva velika ratna žarišta koje su Amerikanci zapalili. Afganistan. Agresije na Afganistan i njegova okupacija pravdaju se činjenicom da su takozvani teroristi 11. septembra 2001. godine izvršili napad na Ameriku, ubivši tom prilikom oko 3000 ljudi. Zanemarit ćemo činjenicu da smo dokazali da je brojka od 3000 ubijenih ljudi poput kapi vode u svjetskim okeanima prema desetinama i stotinama miliona ubijenih tokom historije američkih zločina. Također ćemo zanemariti činjenicu da je, ako je 11. septembar zaista dijelo muslimana, to otprilike broj muslimana koje Sjedinjene Američke Države i njeni saveznici pobiju svake sedmice u svijetu. Ali skrenut ćemo pažnju na sljedeće. Usama bin Laden i njegovi saradnici, koje Amerika krivi za 11. septembar, i nakon 7 godina zapadnjačke okupacije nisu uhvaćeni, a zvaničnici SAD i NATO-a često izjavljuju kako su oni još davno napustili Afganistan i kako se nalaze u susjednom Pakistanu. Dakle, oba cilja koji su zagovarani prije invazije su ispunjeni. Talibanska vlast je svrgnuta, a vođstvo Al-Kaide izvan granica zemlje. Kad je tako, šta Amerika još uvijek radi u Afganistanu? Zbog čega nova američka administracija zagovara povećanje broja svojih trupa i pored ogromnih gubitaka koje su okupatori pretrpili u posljednje 2 godine?
Well, I think that we need 2 to 3 additional brigades that will ensure that our troops that are there aren't being attacked and on the defensive from the Taliban, but instead we can go on the offensive.
Ne zaboravimo, Afganistan je za Ameriku strateški veoma važna destinacija. Graniči se sa nepredvidljivim Iranom i sa Pakistanom, u kojem se nalazi jezgro mnogih islamističkih pokreta. A prije svega, Afganistan je ubrzo nakon okupacije postao tranzit za dragocjeni prirodni gas, koji je Americi prijeko potreban. Važno je napomenuti da su kompanije koje vode ovaj i ostale profitabilne poslove u okupiranom Afganistanu u posrednom vlasništvu doskorašnjeg predsjednika Sjedinjenih Američkih Država Georgea Busha i njegovih najbližih saradnika. Naravno, afganistanska marionetska vlada, koju predvodi američki agent Hamid Karzai, služi samo kao običan dekor i paravan za naivne. Još važnija od prirodnog gasa za Amerikance je nafta, takozvano crno zlato, dragocjena tečnost koja pokreće njihove avione, tenkove, brodove i transportere, njihova oklopna vozila i njihove automobile. A najvažnije od svega, nafta znači milijarde i milijarde dolara, a zemlja koja je prebogata naftom je Irak. Nakon što su gotovo svi njihovi saveznici odbili da uz njih učestvuju u agresiji na Irak, SAD i Velika Britanija su 23.2003. godine započele rat. Ovoga puta njihov izgovor je bio da žele da spriječe Sadama Huseina da upotrijebi nuklearno oružje i time izazove katastrofu svjetskih razmjera. Ubrzo nakon zauzimanja Iraka, oni su priznali da u njemu nuklearnog oružja nema, niti ga je ikada bilo. Njihova tvrdnja da su željeli da uklone zločinca i tiranina sa vlasti i tako oslobode nedužni irački narod, također ne stoji. Sadam Husein je tokom svih godina svoje strahovlade ubio oko 290.000 ljudi, što je svakako velika brojka, ali je ipak malo u poređenju sa brojem žrtava koje je irački narod platio otkad je zapadnjački okupator ušao u zemlju. 1,5 milijuna ubijenih civila za sad. Ali, važno je da je pravi cilj ostvaren. Irački naftni izvori su u njihovim rukama, građevinska mega kompanija Halliburton, bivšeg američkog potpredsjednika Dicka Cheneya, za ogromne sume novca gradi ono što američke bombe razore.
We still seek no wider war.
The United States does not start fights. America does not seek conflict.
I don't like to use military force.
To order the military forces of the United States to take action in reply.
Fellow citizens, last night I ordered U.S. military forces to Panama to defend democracy in Panama. Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait.
Today I ordered
ordered our armed forces to strike at terrorist-related facilities in Afghanistan and Sudan because of the imminent threat they presented to our national security.
Fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
Ako se neko upita šta je sa hiljadama američkih i britanskih vojnika ubijenih od strane iračkih boraca, šta je sa ogromnim gubicima u ljudstvu u Afganistanu, to je za moćnike, globaliste, profitere, za zagovarače demokratije i novog svjetskog poretka apsolutno nevažna činjenica, kao što je to bilo u Vijetnamskom ratu, u Drugom svjetskom ratu i svim ostalim konfliktima koje su započinjali ili podsticali zbog ostvarenja svojih mračnih ciljeva.
Debt is the weapon used to conquer and enslave societies, and interest is its prime ammunition. And as the majority walks around oblivious to this reality, the banks, in collusion with governments and corporations, continue to perfect and expand their tactics of economic warfare, spawning new bases, such as the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, while also inventing a new type of soldier, the birth of the economic hitman.
We economic hitmen really have been the ones responsible for creating this first truly global empire. And we work many different ways. But perhaps the most common is that we will identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our big corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country, power plants, industrial parks, ports, things that benefit a few rich people in that country, in addition to our corporations, but really don't help the majority of the people at all. However, those people, the whole country is left holding a huge debt, and such a big debt they can't repay it, and that's part of the plan, that they can't repay it. And so at some point, we economic hitmen go back to them and say, listen, you owe us a lot of money, can't pay your debt, so sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Allow us to build a military base in your country, or send troops in support of ours to someplace in the world like Iraq, or vote with us on the next UN vote. To have their electric utility company privatized and their water and sewage system privatized and sold to U.S. corporations or other multinational corporations. So there was that whole mushrooming thing, and it's so typical of the way the IMF and the World Bank work. That you put a country in debt, it's such a big debt it can't pay it, and then you offer to refinance that debt and pay even more interest. And you demand this quid pro quo, which you call a conditionality or good governance, which means basically that they've got to sell off their resources, including many of their social services, their utility companies, their school systems sometimes, their penal systems, their insurance systems, to foreign corporations. So it's a double, triple, quadruple whammy. The precedent for economic hitmen really began back in the early 50s when democratically elected Mossadegh, who was elected in Iran, he was considered to be the hope for democracy in the Middle East and around the world. He was Time Magazine's Man of the Year. But one of the things that he'd run on and began to implement was the idea that foreign oil companies needed to pay the Iranian people a lot more for the oil that they were taking out of Iran. The Iranian people should benefit from their own oil. Strange policy. We didn't like that, of course. But we were afraid to do what we normally were doing, which was to send in the military. Instead, we sent in one CIA agent, Kermit Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt's relative. And Kermit went in with a few $1 million and was very, very effective and efficient. And in a short amount of time, he managed to get Mossadegh overthrown. and brought in the Shah of Iran to replace him, who always was favorable to oil. And it was extremely effective.
Bombs overflow Tehran. Army officers shout that Mossadegh has surrendered and his regime as virtual dictator of Iran is ended. Pictures of the Shah are paraded through the streets as sentiment reverses. The Shah is welcomed home.
So back here in the United States, in Washington, people looked around and said, wow, that was easy and cheap. So this established a whole new way of manipulating countries, of creating empire. The only problem with Roosevelt was that he was a card-carrying CIA agent, and had he been caught, the ramifications could have been pretty serious. So very quickly at that point, the decision was made to use private consultants to channel the money through the World Bank or the IMF or one of the other such agencies, to bring in people like me who worked for private companies, so that if we got caught, there would be no governmental ramifications. When Arbenz became president of Guatemala, the country was very much under the thumbs of United Fruit Company, the big international corporations. And Arbenz ran on this ticket that said, you know, we want to get the land back to the people. And once he took power, he was implementing policies that would do exactly that, give the land rights back to the people. United Fruit didn't like that very much. And so they hired a public relations firm, launched a huge campaign in the United States to convince the United States people, the citizens of the United States, and the press of the United States, and the Congress of the United States, that Arbenz was a Soviet puppet, and that if we allowed him to stay in power, the Soviets would have a foothold in this hemisphere. And that at that point in time was a huge fear on everybody's mind, the Red Terror, the Communist terror. And so, to make a long story short, out of this public relations campaign came a commitment on the part of the CIA and the military to take this man out. And in fact, we did. We sent in planes, we sent in soldiers, we sent in jackals, we sent everything in to take him out, and did take him out. And as soon as he was removed from office, the new guy that took over after him basically reinstated everything to the big international corporations, including United Fruit. Ecuador, for many, many years, had been ruled by pro-U.S. dictators, often relatively brutal. Then it was decided that they were going to have a truly democratic election. Jaime Roldos ran for office, and his main goal, he said, as president, would be to make sure that Ecuador's resources were used to help the people. And he won, overwhelming, by more votes than anybody had ever won anything in Ecuador. And he began to implement these policies to make sure that the profits from oil went to help the people. Well, we didn't like that in the United States. I was sent down as one of several economic hitmen to change Roldos, to corrupt him, to bring him around, to let him know, you know, okay, you know, you can get very rich, you and your family, if you play our game, but if you continue to try to keep these policies you've promised, you're going to go. He wouldn't listen. He was assassinated. As soon as the plane crashed, the whole area was cordoned off. The only people allowed in were U.S. military from a nearby base and some of the Ecuadorian military. When an investigation was launched, two of the key witnesses died in car accidents before they had a chance to testify. A lot of very, very strange things that went on around the assassination of Jaime Roldos. I, like most people who've really looked at this case, have absolutely no doubt that it was an assassination. And of course, in my position as an economic hitman, I was always expecting something to happen to Jaime, whether it be a coup or assassination, I wasn't sure, but that he would be taken down because he was not being corrupted. He would not allow himself to be corrupted the way we wanted to corrupt him. Omar Torrijos, president of Panama, was, you know, one of my favorite people. I really, really liked him. He was very charismatic. He was a guy who really wanted to help his country. And when I tried to bribe him or corrupt him, he said, look, John, he called me Juanito. He said, look, Juanito, I don't need the money. What I really need is for my country to be treated fairly. I need for the United States to repay the debts that you owe my people for all the destruction you've done here. I need to be in a position where I can help other Latin American countries win their independence and be free of this terrible presence from the north that you people are exploiting us so badly. I need to have the Panama Canal back in the hands of the Panamanian people. That's what I want. And so, leave me alone. Don't try to bribe me. It was 1981, and in May, Jaime Roldos was assassinated. And Omar was very aware of this. Torrijos got his family together and he said, I'm probably next, but it's okay because I've done what I came here to do. I've renegotiated the canal. The canal will now be in our hands. He just finished negotiating the treaty with Jimmy Carter. In June of that same year, just a couple of months later, he also went down in an airplane crash, which there's no question was executed by CIA-sponsored jackals. Tremendous amount of evidence that one of Torrijos' security guards handed him at the last moment as he was getting on the plane a tape recorder, a small tape recorder that contained a bomb. It is interesting to me how this system has continued pretty much the same way for years and years and years, except the economic hitmen have got better and better and better. Then we come up with, very recently, what happened in Venezuela. In 1998, Hugo Chavez gets elected president, following a long line of presidents who had been very corrupt and basically destroyed the economy of the country. And Chavez was elected amidst all that. Chavez stood up to the United States, and he's done it primarily demanding that Venezuelan oil be used to help the Venezuelan people. Well, we didn't like that in the United States. So in 2002, a coup was staged, which there's no question in my mind, and most other people's minds, that the CIA was behind that coup. The way that that coup was fomented was very reflective of what Kermit Roosevelt had done in Iran, of paying people to go out into the streets, to riot, to protest, to say this Chavez is very unpopular. You know, if you can get a few thousand people to do that, television can make it look like it's the whole country, and things start to mushroom. Except in the case of Chavez, he was smart enough, and the people were so strongly behind him that they overcame it, which was a phenomenal moment in the history of Latin America. Iraq actually is a perfect example of the way the whole system works. So we economic hitmen are the first line of defense. We go in and we try to corrupt governments and get them to accept these huge loans, which we then use as leverage to basically own them. If we fail, as I failed in Panama with Omar Torrijos and in Ecuador with Jaime Roldos, men who refuse to be corrupted, then the second line of defense is we send in the jackals. And the jackals either overthrow governments or they assassinate. And once that happens and a new government comes in, boy, it's going to toe the line because the new president knows what will happen if he doesn't. In the case of Iraq, both of those things failed. Economic hitmen were not able to get through to Saddam Hussein. We tried very hard. We tried to get him to accept a deal very similar to what the House of Saud had accepted in Saudi Arabia, but he wouldn't accept it. And so the jackals went in to take him out. They couldn't do it. His security was very good. After all, he had one time worked for the CIA. He'd been hired to assassinate a former president of Iraq and failed, but he knew the system. So in '91, we send in the troops and we take out the Iraqi military. So we assume at that point that Saddam Hussein is going to come around. We could have taken him out, of course, at that time, but we didn't want to. He's the kind of strong man we like. He controls his people. We thought he could control the Kurds and keep the Iranians in their border and keep pumping oil for us. And then once we took out his military, now he's going to come around. So the economic hitmen go back in the 90s without success. If they'd had success, he'd still be running the country. We'd be selling him all the fighter jets he wants and everything else he wants. But they couldn't. They didn't have success. The jackals couldn't take him out again. So we sent the military in once again, and this time we did the complete job and took him out, and in the process created for ourselves some very, very lucrative construction deals. We had to reconstruct a country that we'd essentially destroyed, which is a pretty good deal if you own construction companies, big ones. So, Iraq shows the three stages. The economic hitmen failed there, the jackals failed there, and there's a final measure the military goes in. And in that way, we've really created an empire, but we've done it very, very subtly. It's clandestine. All the empires of the past were built on the military, and everybody knew they were building them. So the British knew they were building them, the French, the Germans, the Romans, the Greeks, and they were proud of it. And they always had some excuse, like spreading civilization, spreading some religion, something like that. But they knew they were doing it. We don't. The majority of the people in the United States have no idea that we're living off the benefits of a clandestine empire, that today there's more slavery in the world than ever before. And then you have to ask yourself, well, if it's an empire, then who's the emperor? Obviously, our presidents of the United States are not emperors. An emperor is someone who's not elected, doesn't serve a limited term, and doesn't report to anyone, essentially. So you can't classify our presidents that way. But we do have what I consider to be the equivalent of the emperor, and it's what I call the corporatocracy. The corporatocracy is this group of individuals who run our biggest corporations, and they really act as the emperor of this empire. They control our media, either through direct ownership or advertising. They control most of our politicians because they finance their campaigns, either through their corporations or through personal contributions that come out of the corporations. They're not elected, they don't serve a limited term, they don't report to anybody. And at the very top of the corporatocracy, you really can't tell whether a person's working for a private corporation or the government because they're always moving back and forth. So, you know, you've got a guy who one moment is the president of a big construction company like Halliburton, and the next moment he's vice president of the United States, or the president who is in the oil business. And this is true whether you've got Democrats or Republicans in the office. You have the moving back and forth through the revolving door. And in a way, our government is invisible a lot of the time, and its policies are carried out by our corporations on one level or another. And then again, the policies of the government are basically forged by the corporatocracy and then presented to the government. They become government policy. So it's an incredibly cozy relationship. This isn't a conspiracy theory type of thing. These people don't have to get together and plot to do things. They all basically work under one primary assumption, and that is that they must maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs.
This process of manipulation by the corporatocracy through the use of debt, bribery, and political overthrow is called globalization.